All right, everybody. We're going to talk about Venezuela. I have a co-host today. I have Mikey. You may know him from our videos on Andor and Tank Therapy. Hey, Mikey.
Hello.
Mikey. Yeah, he's gonna be my co-host. He's gonna ask some questions of our guests. Our frequent guests are Venezuela analysts and educators and Bolivarians. Cira Pascual and Chris Gilbert joining us from Caracas again, and they will continue to be with us, I hope, unless we, offend them somehow, and then they'll never come back. They'll go on all the other programs that are lining up to have them, which is I've seen you out there on the street, Chris, and I saw you on an Iranian program, I think, too. So
That's
that's
correct.
good. So we're not the only game in town, but I think we have some good questions for you. So yeah, so Chris, Cira, welcome. Man, like what a crazy time. Like I last reported on the third, on the night of the third. It had everything happened on the four at 4 a.m. on the third. And oh, it's good to see you guys,
at
but
at
yeah,
2 a.m. Caracas time.
2 a.m. exactly.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I mean, the first thing I wanted to ask you, like, we're recording this on the 7th, but like, why don't you just tell us like what it was like, for you guys and how people felt and how people are feeling now. Um, just kind of catch us up because people on this channel anyway haven't heard from us since the third itself.
So where we are, it's actually about 3 miles from Fuerte Tiuna, which was one of the sites of the bombings, and where President Maduro and Celia Flores were kidnapped. So not very close, um, but still, the sound of the airplanes and the bombing was really very intense. I mean, the windows kind of like were rattling. Do you say that? And it was very obvious immediately. I mean, pretty much what had happened. We realized that unfortunately, this time around, Trump came around what he had said that he would do. So that was that moment, and then, of course, a little bit later, we learned that the president and his partner had been, well, again, kidnapped. And that day, that very early that morning, many Chavistas made our way to Miraflores, which is the presidential palace, and that's where we there was a self-organized march in support of the, well, against the attack, of course, in claiming, asking that the president be returned, an anti-imperialist forum, which was quite powerful, quite with people from, many Chavistas from different sectors, with an open tribune where everybody was able to talk, everything from politicians to grassroots activists. So that was more or less the first day, which in that first day, many people actually stayed at home for obvious reasons. There were some long queues in the very few stores that were open. There were long queues, people who were getting some basic goods. But the important thing about that day is that there was already clearly a disposition to fight, the disposition to struggle. There was a lot of anger, of course, but there weren't any expressions of support of the attack in Venezuela, any, even the opposition. I mean, with the exception of a very small, very fascist, very radically fascist opposition, everybody is against it. And that was a little bit. That's kind of like a little bit of the personal account. But I think Chris may have some more things to say about that first day, or the first hours in terms of the imperialist attack.
Sure. I want to say that people should open their eyes and see how everyone has done things right here from the beginning. The government responded completely coherently. The very first communication that we received early in the morning was really had all the main points there. You know, it pointed out to the history of the 200-year history of anti-colonialism here. It pointed out to the assault that happened and Cipriano Castro's defiance to a U.S. blockade 125 years ago. And it cited Chavez. So then everything unfolded really with a lot of discipline, a lot of serenity. As Cira was saying, people knew what to do. I think we're all trained here by the memory, the collective memory of the coup d'etat of 2002 and other coup d'etat attempts that have happened here. Part of the collective understanding of how to respond to a coup d'etat is to go to the streets, to go to Miraflores. And there, as Cedar was saying, there was an open mic. What country, isn't that an amazing thing where there's an open mic where everybody comes up and anybody can give an opinion, motorcyclists, grandmothers, young people, all of them give these spontaneous expressions of support for the government. And then Delcy Rodriguez at 3 p.m. gives a masterful press conference in which, both with her words and with the image of, you know, the foreign affairs minister, the minister of defense on her side, and the minister of interior, Diosdado Cabello, and she indicates, completely according to plan, that she's the acting president, that Nicolas Maduro is still the president of the country. She insists that he be returned. And to me, the most impressive thing and the evidence of Delcy Rodriguez's revolutionary quality is that she called on the people to defend the country. She said that it would be a civic military police union, the very idea that Chavez developed and Nicolas Maduro elaborated by including the police as the unity that would defend the people. That's a completely revolutionary idea. So, and then I think one other detail that I think many people should know about is that according to the counter coup plan from 2002, everyone expects a message from the kidnapped president. You know, Chavez managed to send out a message to the people. He was kidnapped on an island in the Caribbean, but through low-level officers who were still loyal to him, he passed a written message that said, I haven't resigned, I'm still the president. So people were waiting for something similar from Nicolas Maduro. And from New York, he gave the sign, you know, which is like victory, venceremos, and he made a fist, like we'll fight. So that became a sign you see in the streets here, a sign of defiance. And so my sense here is that in spite of the technical victory they achieved against us in kidnapping the president through a high-tech operation, we've had political control. And everyone knows that even in a military situation, in a war situation, political control and a political project, they have no political project, even if you listen to them, which is a very unfortunate experience to listen to Donald Trump and his complete sycophants that surround him. They can't even keep a coherent message. It's not at all clear what they want to do. They have no coherent even accusations against Nicolas Maduro. Whereas on our side, there's a coherent message, there's a coherent command, and I think in a political sense, which is 95% of a military situation, we're really in charge. And the response here has been perfect, kind of a perfect response to the situation.
Thank you. The other question I wanted to ask is like you guys, it's always on my mind when I compare it or try to imagine like my life. And you guys are activists and kind of lifelong activists, and I just wondered like how people that are not political like you guys that are in your lives or that you're kind of encountering students and whatnot, like are they more scared? Are they kind of like, what kind of conversations are you having with people that are not like grassroots militants and people involved in the process?
I'd say, well, one thing is that everybody is, I think everybody is pretty angry. at least everybody that I've run into is pretty angry, even if they are not militants. Um, and yeah, some people seem to have retreated a little bit, but by today, life in Caracas is pretty normal. One thing to understand what has happened here is that we've been at it for 26, 27 years of Bolivarian revolution. And at least since 2002, there's been an ongoing aggression against the people of Venezuela by US imperialism. I think it's important to understand that when we think about how people are reacting. And of course, there's the coup attempts, paramilitary incursions, and also a 10-year war uh, based on U.S. sanctions, unilateral coercive measures that has actually killed tens of thousands of people. That doesn't mean that, of course, this has to be recognized as a new phase in the imperialist war against Venezuela. I was talking to somebody at a store. This was yesterday, and he was very angry. I'm not clear if he was Chavista or opposition. He was very angry because he had to go back to work. This was a normal store. His house is in El Valle, kind of like overlooking Fuerte Tiuna. And when the bombing happened, they first saw the light shining uh, through their windows, and then heard, and it was like a very intense light. They thought that there was some big fire or something, and everybody in the barrio, it's kind of like a barrio that overlooks Fuerte Tiuna. And he was very scared, like everybody else. Everybody took out their loved ones out of home. In 23 de enero, in the commune, many people came out too of their homes because there was an attack on a militia building, on the head of the militia, kind of like in the back of 23 de enero. And in many places, so people had situations that were very, very intense and very painful in terms of being direct witnesses of what actually happened, which we were not direct witnesses of what happened. Actually, I have some comrades who were very close to where the helicopters descended, and they heard all the shooting. Shooting, of course, this is oftentimes not told, but shooting from the ground up, because there was a big defense of President Maduro. It's just that the technical superiority of the US was clear. So it is often told that there was no resistance, but the people who were there, who actually were there protecting President Maduro, fought back. They were all killed, both Cubans, 32 Cubans, and many Venezuelans also were killed. And so people are angry. In general, people are angry. People are tired. I'm very tired. Um, Chris is tired. Everybody here is tired. Actually, kind of exhausted. But maybe that's because we are militants. But I think everybody is tired. Even those who are not militants maybe don't have so many obligations or commitments, because of course these are emotionally very intense situations. But the most amazing thing is that there has been unity. The unity that Chris was talking about is very, very, very important. There haven't been any ruptures within the government. And this is very obvious because when Delcy came and did her speech, she was accompanied by the Minister of Interior and by the Minister of Defense and by the Minister of the External Relations and other people in the political and military cabinet. This is important because part of the psyop of imperialism, even though it's not stated overtly, obviously they are trying to feed people this idea that there might have been some rupture. And that, we can say, it's totally wrong. But not only is there integrity within the government and the military, but the people are totally committed to our government, with Delcy Rodriguez as acting president for now, and understanding that Nicolas Maduro is our constitutional president. So this integration between the military, the government, and the people and the grassroots is really important. And this has all the implications that you can imagine in a revolution. In other words, they have the military. You don't know how close it will be to the people and to the militias once a situation comes like this. Once a situation like this comes, you don't know beforehand how much there will be integration between the military and the militias. There are 8 million people enrolled in the militias. These are people who are civilians but who are prepared to defend their homeland. And there has been full integration between the military and the militia. This is super, super important. And it's actually a revolutionary act. So, yeah, that's what I would say in terms of how people have been living it, a little bit from what people who are not necessarily militants are living it, and a little bit of how us, like this very important point about integration and no ruptures within.
Chris, do you want to add stuff?
Sure, I would second that. People have an incredible savoir here. I mean, for example, one thing that you always happens in this kind of situation is people buy things, but actually the buying was much less intense than it had been when the blockade was simply being ramped up. Then that's when people rushed out and made huge purchases. But people, at most, you just saw people calmly buying, going out to get an extra bottle of water and things like that, or standing outside the pharmacy. But everything was very low key. One other thing is clear from if you've seen pictures of these manifestations in defense of the government, defense of the president, there are always these multi-generational events, and quite a lot of people come in with spontaneous expressions. They make their own posters and they handwrite messages. And these manifestations have been growing every day. The first one was small and improvised, very impressive. The second one was armed people, but there you saw armed men and women. And that would be on Sunday in front of Miraflores. Again, a very impressive manifestation with patriotic songs. And then that was followed by the Women's March. There was a big Women's March. And then today was the Communards March. That was really very impressive, with communards from around the country coming in to express their support. One thing that's important to remember is the communard movement here. It's not a social movement as most social movements. It's a movement that has always understood its connection with the government. It's always understood that it has a bi-directional relationship, and that those links with the government have been made stronger through the consultation process that have been going on over the past almost 2 years now. So this is again a sign of the popular support for the president and popular support for the government in this situation.
Okay, thank you. So, Mikey, I wanted Mikey to join because Mikey's also an organizer type. He's not just out here in a basement talking into his camera, like me. So, so Mikey has some questions. I'll turn it over to you, Mikey.
Hello, yeah. First of all, big fan of both your work. In addition to being an organizer, I'm also kind of like a movement media creator and filmmaker. So I kind of wanted to ask about, that angle as well, because I think even on the so-called American left, such as it is, if such a thing even exists, which I tend to start thinking these days that it doesn't really in any organized sense, there are a lot of severe misconceptions and not just an espousal, but a proliferation of just downright dangerous disinformation and wild speculation that I and other comrades have come to believe is largely driven by clout chasing and a need to get people to subscribe to their Substack. And despite all that, I do think it's still like quite pernicious and needs to be addressed, particularly to like a layman audience. Like I, for example, I live in Hawaii, and there are a lot of people who don't know a lot about Venezuela, but they do know about their own history, Hawaiians in Hawaii, and the overthrow of the kingdom government by the United States, particularly, the Navy, but also by, essentially five capitalist sugar barons in 1893. And so they were able to draw pretty intimate connections to recent events, while also kind of conceding the U.S. propaganda line that Maduro is a dictator and that Venezuela is basically a failed state. And I definitely don't fault them for those misconceptions, given that that's basically all we hear from mainstream U.S. media outlets. But I really wanted to hear what your thoughts were first on some of those misconceptions and kind of tackling them. And I'm glad that you both have a highly specialized wealth of knowledge and personal experience in the communes, because I think that is a really critical lens through which to analyze the current situation and also to dismantle the predominant prevailing one in North American compatible left spaces and analysis that I think is very much steeped in accepting the opposition line and the U.S. State Department line, but also kind of viewed through a lens of kind of a Manichaean great man theory of history rather than a bottom-up protagonist theory of history. So I wanted to ask you, like, is Venezuela in a state of collapse where communities are completely atomized into just a set of individuals, or is there something else going on?
Well, I think it's a very important question because indeed that is how the mainstream media projects Venezuela. It's just a society in chaos with a dictator on top. And first of all, I want to begin this by saying that actually I it's not like I have been everywhere around the world, but I have traveled a little bit, and I don't know a more democratic society than Venezuela's society, in the sense that Venezuela's project is actually based on participative and protagonic democracy, which evolved over time. When Chavez promotes first the idea of protagonic democracy, which is actually already in 1991, 1992 in a book that's called The Blue Book, actually in a very short book that's called The Blue Book. He is basically talking about the reorganization of state institutions and the participation of people, but he's not projecting the economic reorganization of society yet. He wasn't at that moment a socialist or a communist. But from the very early days of the Bolivarian Revolution, the idea of a democracy that's not limited to the institutions of liberal democracy has actually been at the core of the Bolivarian Revolution. And this is something that people should understand. So we have, to oversimplify things, we have democracy on two levels, but of course those two levels are interconnected. But to explain it, there's the institutionality that's conventional. So we have a president who we elect and a National Assembly, and there's a Supreme Court, and so on and so forth. Conventional institutions, liberal institutions. And then we have another level, which is neither above or below, but probably that eventually has to become the superior form of organization of society, which is the communal level, which is grassroots democracy, assembly-based grassroots democracy, where people not only take decisions about how to solve the problems that they face day to day, which are many in a society of the global south, which has been historically dependent, and that actually has been under very cruel a regime of sanctions for at least 10 years. So the problems that people face are actually many. So in the assembly, in your commune, in your communal council is kind of like the basic cell. Several communal councils make a commune. We don't need to enter the mechanics of it. But so in your communal council, in your commune, you can come together to decide collectively what problems you have and how to solve them. But we are talking there mostly at the political and social level, but not yet at the economic level. The amazing thing about the communes is that it's not just about the assembly, but it's also about substantive democracy, if we understand substantive democracy as having an economic core. So, liberal democracy is, of course, the democracy that apparently is neutral, but that has a core that is anti democratic, that it's absolutely authoritarian, a capitalist core that serves the interests of a very few. When you think about the communes should have, not all communes, and actually I would say at the moment a minority of communes have already means of production, because when Chavez made the proposal of making the communes and then things got complex, he died. We think he was killed. And then after that, a few years of very intense aggression against Venezuela came. So while there was a development of communes, we could say a grassroots development of communes, there weren't resources for communes to come about having their own means of production. A means of production, you just don't build it because you want to. You have to have resources. So going back to the basics, communes, because I'm going on too long and I'm sorry about it, communes walk over two legs, one economic, one political, one grassroots democracy, direct democracy, assembly based, and the other one economic, control over the means of production under a form that is called direct social communal property. In the means of production in my commune, El Panal commune, it has a meat processing plant, it has a textile making plant, it has a soap making plant. Those plants do not actually employ the majority of the people in the commune by far. But all the surplus produced in those plants goes back to the commune. That doesn't mean that the workers are exploited. It just means that the surplus that is generated in that specific context, it actually goes back to the commune as a whole. And so the property, that's why we call it communal property, which is not to be confused with cooperative property, which is an interesting transition form of property, but it's not necessarily a socialist form of property.
Great, thank you so much. And yeah, I think knowing about the work of the commune and it's kind of like radical direct democracy, I think speaks not only to like what is the exciting thing, the inspiring thing that's actually going on in socialist Venezuela, not just from leadership, but from the ground up. But I think what also distinguishes these communes, of which there are thousands, right? And if you have an actual number about the total estimated population to this point, I would love to know about it. But also, it's not really an anarchist conception of a communist, particularly like a white North American conception of what a commune might be, because a lot of those, especially in North America, have been tiny, failed, short-lived experiments because they haven't really developed a conception of imperialism within their analysis, which, as we know, is the primary contradiction that we face ourselves with. So I think maybe Chris, if you could kind of articulate like what distinguishes these communes from kind of maybe the common Western imagination of what a commune might be, and its direct kind of relation to the Bolivarian Revolution and the struggle for national liberation.
Oh, you're absolutely right to try to distinguish between the communes in Venezuela and a kind of anarchist or autonomist vision of communes. In fact, A lot of things that happen in Venezuela are kind of rediscoveries of important revolutionary lessons over history. So Lenin said the most important question in any revolution is the question of state power. And Chavez was completely channeling that from the beginning because, in the 90s, we were dominated by a kind of movementismo in which everything was about changing the world without taking power and anarchoid ideas like that. So Chavez completely turned the page on that when he decided to change the world by taking power. But at the same time, as Cira was pointing out, there's always been this concept of popular power, very much like in the Bolshevik Russian Revolution. The idea was to take power, but also maintain popular power and have this dialogue. This has been done different ways in different revolutions. In the Chinese Revolution, a key expression of popular power was the People's Army. At the same time, the Chinese also developed, starting from 1958, a communal system that got to be more important and then was walked back around 1980. But here the communes, whether the different expressions of popular power, whether they're communal councils, communes, they're always conceived as integrated or coordinated or part of the larger revolutionary system. And that's, of course, as you were saying, key to confronting imperialism. You need to have a strong state to confront imperialism. And you need to have unified people to confront imperialism. At the same time, the whole notion of confronting a more powerful military enemy requires an integration between the people and the state and the revolutionary state, especially the revolutionary command center in the state. And so this has been what's been done here with different mechanisms. Initially, there were only community councils, and then in 2009 there was the jump to communes. And you asked for a number. There's about 5,000 communes here. Technically, 4,500 are communes, and then there's another 500 that are called communal circuits. They're like incipient communes. And some of those communes bring together, if you do the numbers, they're like 10 to 20 community councils. Community councils tend to be thought of as about 300 families. And so a lot of communes, like El Panal commune, amount to about 10,000 people. And the same for El Panal commune is in Caracas. It's one of the most lively communes in Caracas. And then, for example, taking another well-known commune, El Maizal commune, is also about 10,000 people. I'd like
Is
to
it safe to say that
mention,
there's like maybe
I'd like to say something about Nicolas Maduro's quality as a leader. Nicolas Maduro really, first of all, they wouldn't have kidnapped him if he weren't a great leader, number one, and they wouldn't have done it because if he weren't an important leader, it wouldn't have any importance taking him away. But I want to point out three, like if you really look at what Nicolas Maduro has done, first of all, I always point to three things. One is maintaining the unity of Chavismo. When Chavez died, maintaining a unified left, a unified patriotic movement is the central achievement. I mean, the central problem. If you look at a country, our country that's the closest, we're kind of brothers in many senses, it's Colombia. And in Colombia, there's a left movement there, but they've always, or the past at least several decades, they've always suffered from a lack of unity, and that makes the movement weaker. So maintaining this unity of the left was an extremely important achievement of Nicolas Maduro. And the second thing is overcoming the blockade. Anyone who lives here, opens their eyes, has seen how things were very serious here in 2016, 2017. But with time, Nicolas Maduro and his team, which includes Delcy Rodriguez, who was in charge of the oil project, they have learned to overcome the blockade, and life has become notably better every year from about 2020 onward. So it's not a failed country at all. In fact, there has been an economic recovery, and I'm sure that's another thing that really bothers U.S. imperialism, is the capacity to overcome the blockade and have this economic recovery. And the third thing I always point out of the important achievements of Nicolas Maduro, and this really shows his revolutionary credentials, is that having maintained the unity of Chavismo, having weathered the worst of the blockade, then once again, with an economic recovery, he turns once again to the communal movement and to reimpulsing socialism as the project of Chavez, the Bolivarian socialist project of Chavez. So these are really very, very impressive achievements. And all of them should be recognized as when we think about his quality as a leader.
Thank you. So I guess like to wrap it up, on the night of the third, when I did my broadcast, I was sure the Americans were going to bomb again that night. I just thought, if they're going for regime change, then regime change is not complete, and they've shown that they have the ability to bomb. They're gonna keep bombing, and so I was surprised. Each night I've gone to bed and thought, they're gonna bomb again in the morning, and obviously they still can. But I wondered, like, what what people are thinking about what the Americans are likely to do next. Like, how do you guys see what the American strategy is? I didn't think it was a great idea to let Maduro speak. The first thing he said was, "I'm the president of Venezuela." Like, he's such a like cool guy. Like, he just looks, everybody's like trying to hug him, and like they had obviously beaten Celia, and she appears in court with a big bruise on her eye, and it's just like everything they're doing looks bad. I guess they don't care about how they look anymore. But like, what are they doing? Like, what do people think? What do you guys think they're up to at this point? And Cira, you're muted.
The truth is that the U.S. obviously is very capable for actions such as this one. They haven't always been effective with actions such as this one, but they have. Actually, there is seems like there's a fair amount of evidence that they did it with the Mossad, which is far more expert than the U.S. imperialist machine at these kinds of actions. But we don't know the details on that yet. The thing is that, as you said earlier, you do not control a country just by bombing it. You actually need to have control of the territory, and so that they don't have control of the territory at all. I think that the most so as we think about what might be the plans of U.S. imperialism, I mean, I think that there are many reasons why they are doing this. One is to scare the shit out of other progressive governments, and to scare the shit out of us, but they haven't succeeded. And to try to generate ruptures within, which they haven't succeeded again. But I think that Venezuela has been in a situation of exemplary punishment for a long time. So this is part of the ongoing exemplary punishment against the people of Venezuela and its government, against the sovereign project of the Bolivarian Revolution. And this is one more moment in this. Of course, that's probably not enough for them. Right now, there are many. I don't know if the US actually has a plan as to what is the next step. My sense is that they actually may not have a plan as to what is the next step, because there are, as you have seen, contradictions in terms of the discourse. And sometimes they say that Delcy is the president, and other times they say that they are in charge, and analyzing their discourse is just totally unclear on what their plan might be. And if they cannot present the current situation in a coherent way, there's no reason to think that they have a real plan for the future, because what is happening right now is not presented coherently. So if that's the case, can they really have a plan about the future? My sense is no. They don't have a plan about the future, but of course that doesn't mean that it's not a dangerous situation. That's not going to be a situation of ongoing danger. We can actually if they ever really want control of the territory, I don't think I would have said this, I don't know, a month ago. But having seen what they have seen, we can actually not even rule out an old style military intervention. Of course, we know that that's not very much of the liking of the Trump bases and so on. But there are other interests. There's the big oil interest. There's also the need to present a victory that goes further than just bombing and kidnapping two people and killing, by the way, more than 100 people and destroying a lot of infrastructure, which they have. We have to remember the people who have been killed, the very heroic people who have been killed, as I was saying, both Cuban and Venezuelans. So, as for the plan, I don't know. But what I know is what is happening here among the bases, among the Chavista people, among the people who are committed to transforming their daily lives. And that's the majority of Venezuelans. Of course, there are Chavistas, but the majority, there are opposition people, but the majority of the people are actually committed to this project. Different levels. There will be people who are more committed. Some people will go to a march every so often, and some people will just vote for Chavismo. And then there's a really militant core, which is actually not small at all. A very, very militant core that would be represented by those 8 million people who have expressed their disposition and are prepared to defend the homeland as militia men and women. So what we can foresee in terms of the future is uh, the struggle goes on. People are more and more committed to making communes. Maduro said that this was going to be the year of the transition of the communal transition to socialism. That's what he said last year. Delcy has already talked about this. There's a continuity in terms of the strategic objectives. The strategic objective is the commune, and that's what we think will happen, what we know will happen. Actually, we actually know that there's going to be both a continuation and actually to a certain degree also the radicalization of the process, because as the communes become more and more robust, this project becomes more and more robust. But also I have to say that as the communes become more and more robust, it's also our capacity to defend the revolution becomes stronger, because the communes are the spaces where people directly commit to the transformation of their own lives, and that means a further commitment to the defense of the homeland, of sovereignty, and of the collective project.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know it's getting late for you too. It's almost midnight in Venezuela, but if you'll permit, I would love to ask one follow-up question and a wrap-up question. What you were mentioning, Cira, about kind of like how the Trump administration, they've kind of revealed to not really have any kind of clear plan of what's next. And that is kind of, like you said, kind of part of what makes them so dangerous. They could do anything. But I think what was notable about the snatch and grab abduction operation that they conducted was they felt like that was not just that they could do it, but that was the within the limitations of what they could do. And I think what you and Chris outlined in terms of like the militias who are also devoted to the nation of Venezuela, and the communes and the colectivos, which I wish we had more time to talk about, prevented them, I think, right, from weighing seriously a full-scale invasion of Venezuela. Not to mention the geographical difficulties that come with a full-scale invasion of Venezuela. So I wanted to hear what thoughts you might have on the project, the ongoing revolutionary project of the communes as a deterrent to U.S. direct occupation or invasion.
I want to say something about I feel that Trump does indeed represent a huge threat to humanity. He is a fascist. Many people might have a difficult time understanding. They expect a fascist to wear a brown shirt and have small toothbrush mustache. and the differences with historical fascism, which are many. But sometimes I think it's best to roll back to a kind of proto-fascist figure like Napoleon III, Louis Napoleon, because he was also a kind of just adventurer. He arrived and became the emperor of France, partly because he had to pay off his own debts. And between the tragedy and the farce, he tended more towards the farcical side of things. But that's an image of Trump as a fascist, pretty good image of him. But as far as like fascist behavior in the whole Trump administration, it's completely isomorphic with 20th century fascism. He does Gleichschalten, which is the homogenization of cultural institutions. Recently, the Kennedy Center has been renamed the Trump Center, and the purging of universities, the shutting down of pro-Palestine activism. All these things are what like fascists did with Gleichschalten. There's also the Führer principle. Carl Schmitt, the Nazi ideologue, promoted this subordination to the leader, and that's exactly what you see with Trump's lackeys like Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, all of them praising Trump for whatever absurdity he's recently uttered and saying how great it is. So we have the Führer principle. But I think that right now for peoples of the world, when the proper understanding of what the Nazis were trying to do was to colonize the peoples of the world, especially through the Slavic peoples. They invaded Russia and they intended to enslave Slavic peoples. So that's why what was called the Great Patriotic War from the Soviet Union was an anti-colonial war, and it was to avoid the enslaving of the Slavic peoples, converting them into slaves. Now, when Trump proposes that he has the right of life or death over anyone on the planet, like this essentially, they feel like they can seize and destroy whoever they don't like. They feel that they have the right over the world's resources. This is essentially a colonial right, and the right of life or death over colonial subjects, enslaved subjects, is essentially enslaved subjects. So that's what he's proposing, to recolonize the world. There's a total non-recognition of nations and of peoples. I'm sure the people of Hawaii can feel that very directly. They've had their sovereignty disrespected by the United States. And so all around the world, people should understand that their dignity and even their existence is under threat by Donald Trump. No, but I do completely agree with you with your assessment of the attack on Venezuela. It is a small technical victory, but it's a huge political failure, and it's even a military failure. And you can see how they can't even maintain a coherent message. They say they're running Venezuela, then they say they're not running Venezuela. Then they say that the Venezuelan government is going to do things as they want them to, but the Venezuelan government doesn't do things as they want them to. So one of the most recent things is that the Venezuelan government has agreed to deliver, under duress, of course, 60 million barrels of oil to Donald Trump. And he's claiming this is a victory. But it's not a victory at all, because the oil industry is still being run by PDVSA, the national oil industry. And this is a very small, compared to the robbing of Citgo, the value of Citgo is like $11 billion, and the value of this oil is close to $2.5 billion. So they've already taken 4 to 5 times as much oil. And moreover, according to PDVSA communication, the national oil company's communication from today, this will be under the same terms as Citgo. So the Citgo situation has always been seen by Venezuela as beneficial. I didn't mean Citgo, I mean Chevron. This will be under the same conditions as Chevron. And the Chevron situation has always been understood here as our benefit. So basically what Trump is calling a victory is basically the last straw that he's grabbing on. He's trying to put a spin on his own defeat. And this is clearly our staying in control. In some sense, PDVSA achieving what it's long wanted to achieve, which is having 2 or 3 agreements similar to what's going on with Chevron. So I think the Trump administration has been failing over the past 3 days, and we've been winning. And they're just trying to put a spin on their own defeat.
And sorry, go ahead, Cira.
So I'll say something about that. I mean, we still don't know the terms of what is being talked about with the United States, but it seems like a quantity between 30 and 60 million barrels, which would represent about 1/3 to 1/4 of what Venezuela produces yearly, would go to the United States. Venezuela has been wanting to sell more oil to the United States. What we do not know in terms of the details is that some of it may be food for oil. Some of these may be food for oil. Food for oil is not ideal, but actually, since the beginning of the blockade, of the criminal blockade, one of the things that President Nicolas Maduro had been demanding is, given that we have this blockade, what about food for oil? And if that turns out to be the negotiation, it will not. It actually will be an okay negotiation. Obviously, Venezuela would prefer to maintain absolute control in terms of the sales of its oil. There's no doubt about that. But making that kind of agreement would not be actually a concession in terms of our sovereignty. And that's the most important thing to understand. And a little bit going back to the issue of the communes, I think we should do a program on communes maybe when we are less tired, less focused on this attack. But I think that I do want to finish on an optimistic point, is that communes, many of them are very incipient, and other communes are more robust. That's the truth. Many of them don't have means of production, and others do. But the government, with something that Chris was mentioning before, which are the consultations, has really generated a mechanism to really activate, really, I would say, even thousands of communes that had a very precarious existence as a commune. So to have a commune, you have to have an active assembly. And there were many communes that, for whatever reason, because life is actually hard here, because there wasn't maybe a clarity in terms of what to do, because for whatever reasons, many communes existed, but that had a very incipient communal life. And now we see via the consultations that those thousands of communes that were very incipient have an active communal life. And this active communal life has been important in the defense of the Bolivarian process right now. I think that if we had this event happen, say 3 years ago or so, the response from the most committed Chavistas, from the grassroots, more committed Chavistas, would have been there. And I don't think the turnout would have been different. But actually, I think that the marches may have been smaller. It's that the government has fully turned to the commune, which is the strategic objective for the revolution, but also the space where you can actually see and tocar, you can actually touch something new if you are part of it. That is what has made this response to the imperialist attack on Caracas and Venezuela, because it wasn't only on Caracas, so powerful, so committed, with such a disposition to for sacrifice. Because I'll tell you, going to a march for hours, one day after another, and then people are working too, and they have to care for their kids, and they have to do whatever they have to do. That is really exhausting, and people are doing it, and they are doing it with actually that disposition to sacrifice, but also, as is the case, no, this is actually not a stereotype. When you go to these marches, I think that the first day nobody was really smiling, but by the second day maybe people were not smiling. But by now, people are also arrechos, angry, but also at the same time celebrating that imperialism hasn't succeeded in terms of their larger objective. And again, I think that, of course, the direction of President Maduro and the revolutionary government has been important there, but also the fact that people are committed to a project that they directly participate in, and that actually transforms their lives, that is something very important in terms of the response to the imperialist attacks. So yeah, I guess I think that for myself, I will close with that sense of optimism, sense of optimism, and really. For those people who again listen to the mainstream media, because oftentimes that's all that there is, yeah, really know that there is something extraordinary here, that is profoundly democratic, and that actually opens a new window onto a much better world.
Wonderful. And with
I want
that,
to say
yeah,
something briefly
yeah,
too.
go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. One of the victims under fascism, one of the victims is reason and rationality, and I want to make a call to people to be rational. Here in Venezuela, there's been a coherent message sent to people. There's remarkable unity, clarity in the discourse, and on the other side, there's irrationality, confusing messages. And I want to call out to viewers to not here. You have a perfect opportunity to listen to what we're saying here, not us, Cira, Pascual, Marquina, and Chris Gilbert, but listen to what the spokespeople of the government are saying. Everything points to their credibility. Don't listen to what spokespeople from. Don't listen. Don't. Trump cannot be trusted. People hang on his words, but that's a very dangerous idea, to hang on his words or any of the people around him. Don't listen to what the Wall Street Journal says. Don't listen to what Eva Gallagher, who's probably a CIA operative, says. Listen, you have every opportunity here to combat this assault on reason by paying attention to what's being said here. In the last conference, the last international conference here, it was proposed, one of the, I think the fifth resolution was that Caracas would be a center for reflection on sovereignty and peace. And I propose that people pay attention to Caracas as a center for reflection on sovereignty and peace, just like that. People in the world have the opportunity to combat irrationality and listen to what's being said from the spokespeople here.
I think a lot of the people like in the US left were asking the wrong question when this invasion first happened, right? They were all, I mean, we were all bewildered, of course, but they were just so like vehement about constantly asking, like, how could the Venezuelan government let their president be abducted? And I think that's totally the wrong question. The question we should be asking is one to ourselves. How did we in the United States and the global north let our president kidnap someone else's elected leader, right? And so my last request for you is like, do you have any call to action to the United States or the global north who want to see an end to this?
Well, actually, we have seen a tremendous mobilization in the United States and in Europe, and actually in Asia too, but mostly the ones that I have seen are in Latin America, the United States, Canada too. So these massive mobilizations are actually fill us with hope, because we know that we are not alone. They are really, really important. And I think that what has happened in Venezuela, of course, what the main waking up point is the genocide in Palestine, in Gaza. But this, as it comes following that, it actually makes it clear that it's not one specific aberration that's happening there in West Asia, that actually this is the logic of US imperialism around the world. And in that sense, I think that this moment has to be turned into both. We need support, we need solidarity, it needs to be heard, and that's why programs like this one are important. That's all important. But also, there's this possibility of having this being, I don't know, it sounds very weird, but a teaching moment too, that people really get to understand what imperialism is, and that people really understand the full consequences of how US empire operates. So as we think about the future, and we are grateful and happy, really very happy to see so many gestures of solidarity, we also hope that this will, on a more permanent basis, bring the working class of the United States and everywhere else, that and the working class of Venezuela and the working class of everybody around the world, basically, that we will all come closer together under the circumstances. We either do that or we are really fucked. So I mean, we kind of like really have to do it. And but we are hopeful. We are hopeful because we have never seen so much solidarity, so many very rapid action around the world in solidarity with the people of Venezuela and against U.S. imperialism. And by the one last thing about the brutality of U.S. imperialism, which also expresses itself obviously in the United States in so many ways. We just saw the death of a person, this person who was just reporting on ICE kidnappings. So kidnappings happen here in Venezuela by the U.S. imperialists, and they happen in the U.S. and people who witness it are killed by ICE. So we have the same enemy, and it behaves pretty much the same way everywhere, with different connotations. Of course, the people of the global south, we do get the shorter end of the stick, but the poor, racialized migrant populations of the global north suffer it very much like we do here.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, the way Trump has messaged that after that murder has been, it's like he wants to go to war with the population of the US too. It's quite dramatic that he's, I don't know, it seems like the government's trying to start a war on everybody uh, one day after another.
If only we were as
Sure.
organized as Venezuelan communes.
Yeah, right.
We'd be able to stop that
Sure.
kind of thing.
One of the effects of fascism is to bring colonial practices to home. You know, so you guys will experience colonial practices in your own flesh. And that provides an opportunity to overcome the separation between global north and global south, because with the imperialism tends to buy off a part of the global north's working class. This is what's called the workers' aristocracy. But fascism, by its direct attacks against and its attempt to recolonize people or to colonize people inside of the country, and promote colonial practices inside of even the fascist country itself, that provides a possible link to our own struggles in the global south and a way forward. You know, one message I think is important that we can show to here is venceremos. You know, like, I do think that we're not defeated here. You know, we're proof that we can take on an assault like that and respond effectively, and turn it into a victory that's turn it into a military technical victory that's not important. So I'd like to say that the Venezuelan people can be example to people in the world that they can resist U.S. imperialism, hold out, and show that just like the Palestinian people have shown that you can hold out, you can resist, you can actually defeat the enemy on many grounds. So let this be, as Che Guevara said, you know, 1, 2, 3 Vietnams.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I'm into that. Oh.